Good evening and welcome to OTF Connects. Tonight we're going to be enjoying a presentation with Maria Vambalas called Exploring Environmental Change Through Critical Inquiry. Maria is an experienced facilitator with OTF Connects as well as with other groups, I would imagine. I think we're really in for a treat. So welcome to all of you. And at this point, I'm going to advance to Maria's first slide, and I'll turn things over to her. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much, Susan, and hello to everyone. We've got actually a nice size group tonight, and that will allow us to have some more interaction, which is great. Just a little more about me. I've taught for almost 15 years now in various capacities. I have taught the grade 7 geography class for 10 years, but I've spent the last year with my work with the Critical Thinking Consortium really grappling with the grade 7 curriculum, particularly the physical geography unit, the changing patterns unit. And because of that, we were writing a resource document. I really wanted to share that with teachers because I did have the time to really think through the curriculum. Some things emerged that I think will be useful because we all are having to implement this new curriculum. And at times, the reality is there aren't always the kind of resources that we need to maybe do that. And so we spend some time really trying to figure that out. I do want to ask with the group, how many of you have done workshops with the Critical Thinking Consortium, whether a webinar through OTF Connects or another kind of workshop? So you could use the polling tool, the yes or no, just so I get a sense of the group. Okay, so it looks like actually a pretty even split here. So I will definitely be going over some of the core ideas and framework of the Critical Thinking Consortium, but I've really endeavored to do that with geographic thinking at the forefront. How many of you right now are teaching the grade 7 geography class? Again, if you want to use your polling tool to let us know. Okay, great. So a number of you, or perhaps you will be. And if you're not teaching it, then I'm also curious, and you could perhaps write in the chat box what drew you to the webinar tonight. Perhaps it's an instructional leadership role, curiosity, you feel you will be teaching it at some point. I'd love to know. Just to get us started and ground us in the environment, if you could use the text writing tool and just write which place on earth most awakens your love of the physical environment. What's the place in the world that when you're there, you really feel that strong connection? And feel free to place your name beside the place that you're really drawn to. Okay, so beautiful. A shoreline, the mountains, the beauty of BC, the ocean. For me, it's my family is originally from Greece, and my uncle actually has a small little, a very humble place on a Greek island called Skiros, and I try to visit as often as I can. There's few places that, well, I'm just in love with the physical environment, and that is one place in particular that I just adore, being close to the ocean and an island being surrounded by that kind of water and the sun, the climate. It's incredible. The lake is polluted, Kristen, but it's pretty to look at. That's pretty perfect in terms of what we're going to be grappling with tonight. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I did want to mention as well that I have started a hashtag EnviroInquiry so that we can continue the conversation. For those of you who are on Twitter, feel free to do that. I will also at the end of the session give you my email, and I really do welcome questions and comments after the fact. So if you do want to continue the conversation, please feel free. This is the hashtag. And you can also Twitter me, and we can have some exchanges there as well. The question I have for you in terms of geography, which sometimes is a subject which it depends where you are, but something that, that's often been the case is it sometimes gets short shrift. Sometimes because of course, time, which always seems to be an issue in education. Sometimes a teacher has more comfort in teaching history rather than geography. Could be the lack of resources, but sometimes it is difficult to bring geography into the center. But I wanted to ask you, as fellow educators, from your perspective, what are the two most compelling reasons for us to engage our students in critically thoughtful engagement with physical geography and physical geography issues? So again, I'm going to invite you to use your text tool and write in the box. I'll give you, and going to take a little moment to think about that. What are the two most compelling reasons? Perhaps if right now you only can think of one compelling reason, please feel free to share your one reason. To get them exploring their world and asking questions. Yes, a love for geography fosters lifelong learning. I agree with you. To better understand the world, the interaction, the notion of connection is coming up. To allow them to critically think about sustainability. And I think that is more important than it has ever been. To provide a sense of place. And especially in the times we're living in where technology is so exciting. I mean, look at us being able to engage with each other through this webinar, which is fantastic. But also, we're aware of that at times, is technology taking us away from our sense of place? And how do we locate ourselves and have that embodied stance of being of this earth, fulfilling basic human needs, food and water, and understanding the world they live? Well, thank you, everyone, for those really thoughtful answers. I think, it's absolutely true. Those are incredibly compelling reasons why we need to critically engage our students in geographic issues. In the curriculum, there really are these lenses, and there's always different districts, different provinces, countries will have some different lenses around geography, and these are the lenses for geographic thinking in Ontario. And of course, they're similar, but they can be slightly different. And in Ontario, when our curriculum is asking us to invite students to think geographically and to think like geographers, these are really the four key lenses: is patterns and trends, spatial significance, interrelationships, and geographic perspective. And I want to invite you right now to think about, in your own teaching of geography, just to think of perhaps one example or two examples that you can think of where you really specifically focus and invite students to think about or think through that particular lens of geography. And if you want to share in the chat box at any point, again, some of the questions we'll be writing right on the slides, and other times, if you want to share in the chat box, please feel free. But I did just want to ground us in this, because when we're talking about thinking like a geographer, this is what the new curriculum is really asking of us as educators, is to bring students into these dimensions of geographic thinking. So that can really inform the decisions that we're making, the instructional decisions that we're making in the classroom. I did ask, and a link went out, whether you had a piece of paper or a journal or a notebook or perhaps even a document on your computer. I did want for us to start a thought book. So just for yourself to write down some of your own thinking as this webinar unfolds. And the question I would like us to be grappling with throughout is, how do I effectively engage grade 7 students in opportunities to think like a geographer? And if you are an instructional leader or you're not teaching the grade 7 right now, you can easily tweak this question. Your question could be, how do I effectively engage teachers in opportunities to help students think like a geographer? You can tweak the question slightly. But I'd like you to take a moment right now and jot those thoughts down, just your initial thoughts right now around how can you engage students in those opportunities to think like a geographer. Things that perhaps you are doing, things that you might be aspiring to do in your class. Could be things that you want to refine in your own practice right now. Perhaps you're saying, I haven't really engaged with patterns and trends or used that lens. Just to invite you right now to think about some things that you would like to do or that you are doing. We are going to be returning to that thought space that you're creating, and I do want to highlight this as a strategy, and I will say more about it. So there is something to this ask I'm asking of you. And I don't want to rush you, but I will move on. But again, at any point, please use that space to write down ideas and thoughts to this question. This is actually a copy of Newton's thought book, and it highlights this idea of thinking as being a very messy and complex process. And sometimes, again, it could be because of the rush on time, various factors. We don't always have these opportunities, both ourselves as teachers and our students, to be able to write down our thinking around some of these big issues, some of these big questions. And it's neat to show students some examples of thought books. I'm reading an excellent book right now called The Invention of Nature. And I'll just turn to that for a second, by Andrew Wolff, which explores Alexander von Humboldt, he's sort of considered she's sort of bringing him up as the modern father of environmentalism. I'm sure some indigenous elders might have, challenged that idea, but certainly she's bringing forward this lost history of this person who actually really began to see the interconnectedness of the environment. And he was born in 1769 and he died in 1859. And he then predicted human-induced climate change based on what he was seeing. So it's a really excellent book for yourself if you are really inspired by the environment. I do recommend it. But I brought this up because this is a page from Alexander von Humboldt, his own diaries and journals, and just to show that this idea of a thought book, and this is, I think, more of a geographic or natural thought book, is something that you might inspire students with as well as you're getting them to contemplate some big questions. I'd also like to ask you, what are the two of the most significant challenges you face in teaching the new grade 7 geography curriculum? And again, I'm going to invite you to write in the text box here. What are the challenges that you're facing? Mhm. Right, so being in a remote area, helping students see outside the small community, so trying to open up the world and open up perspective. Yes, definitely. The curriculum itself needing to be unpacked by teachers. I would agree. I mean, having written a resource related to this curriculum, it's certainly one you need to spend some time with. It is different, and it is inviting us to some different ways of teaching. Resources, having the time, right? Time to dig deeper. Being asked to teach history and geography. I'm just looking here, Debbie co-taught a case study on Sheshwan and Shoal Lake. Yes, the learning task involves students using the geographical thinking skills to look at issues in these communities. Yes, and that sounds like a very authentic task, and inviting them to look at that and look at something that's happening in the world right now, and perhaps in a community. I'm not sure if the community is close to them or they had a relationship to it, but certainly something that they could relate with in some way. Right, understanding the new curriculum, a lot to do. Absolutely. So thank you again, everyone, for sharing about these challenges. I think they're absolutely real. One of the things for us to think about is how we are engaging our students in geography. Again, how do we get them excited about teaching geography, about learning geography? And in the consortium, we do have a conceptualization of engagement where we try to help ourselves as educators differentiate between the different levels and to sort of begin to see in the task that we're designing, or identifying the task that we're designing, whether we are moving students into the level of being challenged and caught up in the educational task, and in fact being perhaps transformed and inspired by it. And this is really a goal, I think, that we share as educators. I mean, we do love when we see students really challenged and engaged in what it is that they're learning. And it's really that at that place of transformation, of empowerment and being challenged, that students are developing their abilities to think critically, collaboratively, and creatively. And it's the tasks that invite that and draw that out of students that also we find bring out those levels of engagement. So that's one of the themes, is how do we engage students in this geographic thinking in a meaningful way? So taking a look at this, at these definitions of critical, creative, and collaborative, I'd like you again to think about what's happening in your own geography class and affirm some of the ways that you are providing opportunities for students to think critically or think creatively, think collaboratively. Just take a moment, and again, if you want to share that in the chat box, please feel free to do so. So let's give people a moment. Thinking about how we can create geographic tasks that are inviting that critical, creative, and collaborative thinking. Right, where again, we have that traditional notion of geography that it is just memorizing places on a map, and of course, having that global literacy and that sense of place is very important. But in so many ways, geography and the environment in particular is really at the heart of what the world and leaders in the world are having to grapple with. So there's so much richness there to invite students to engage that way. This, I find this quite always a reminder and sort of sobering as a teacher, that we remember only 10% of what we read, but we remember 90% of what we say and do. So when I'm thinking about wanting students to leave with deep understandings and to remember some of the key concepts, how do I do that? How am I creating these tasks where they are really saying and doing, where they are thinking, in this case, like a geographer, and they're they're engaged in tasks that are similar to what task geographers might do. How do I create that in my classroom? And I think this quote by Newman is really powerful as well, that it is those intellectual demands that we're making of students, not always just the strategy or the techniques, but what we're really asking students to do that most powerfully influences the degree of student engagement. So that makes us think about, okay, what kinds of tasks am I designing in the geography classroom? Again, I'm going to invite you into a question here to think about, to what extent have the ways in which our students are engaging with issues of physical geography changed? And that could be thinking about, you know, from your own experience of learning geography. It could be from the beginning of your career, depending on how long you've been teaching geography. But I'd like you to think about this question and make a decision. You've got to come down on one of these sides, whether it's almost no change, little change, some change, considerable change, or dramatic change. And I invite you to place your number in the box, and if you want to say a little bit about why you are, you've chosen, let's say, 5 dramatically different or 1 almost no change, I invite people to share their thinking around that. So when you think about this subject and you think about these issues, has there been a change today? Is it different today than, let's say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago? So some are saying considerable, some change, right? So significant based on the new curriculum. Yeah, it's your first year teaching. It's changed a lot since you were in school. Simply in the fact they can engage deeply. Right, through the internet. It's so true. There are so many, the one thing too the internet allows us to do is they can access some videos and photographs that might have been more difficult to get into the classroom, and now a lot of that's at our fingertips. I think there's greater focus on the impact of man on the physical environment. Yes, the human change has become quite central. Yeah. I would agree with that. Teachers are struggling. How do you combine the more traditional style with inquiry-based learning? We are right in the middle of a very big change in education in many ways, right? But it doesn't have to be a huge, necessarily, start from scratch. But we can see it as a renovation that we're engaged in. But things are changing. We all are aware of that. Yeah, geography for a lot of us is just coloring maps, for sure. I have to say that in my experience in intermediate school, neither history nor geography were particularly engaging, and it really did sort of turned me off from those subjects until later in my life, and when I discovered them from a more critical perspective, it really opened things up for me. Students want to take action, yes, after they learn about environmental issues. That's a dramatic change. The teacher's passion rubs off on your students. Thank you all again so much for these really thoughtful answers. It seems like, most of the group, and again, if someone does not agree, do not feel like there's no group mind here. We're engaged in some critical thought, but it does seem like more of this group is leaning towards, yeah, things have really changed a lot in terms of how we're grappling with physical geography. So now how are we going to respond to this? This is the task that we have. So thank you. Now what we just did is an example of critical thinking. That question, to what extent have the ways in which our students are engaging with issues of physical geography changed? And there are a number of different definitions of critical thinking, but I do want to put forward that at the consortium, which is educators, principals, academics, there's a definition that we've sort of settled on from a pedagogical standpoint. So in order to help us explicitly teach critical thought. And that definition is that critical thinking is thinking through a problematic situation about what to believe or how to act, where the thinker makes the reasoned judgment that uses intellectual tools. So we're going to look at that. What does that mean? We've got a problematic situation. If we go back to this question asks you to what extent. So you have to grapple with this notion of to what extent and really think about it. And there are a number of things that you brought to bear on that, a number of your experiences as a teacher. If I'd asked this question of someone who was not teaching geography, had never taught geography, and was not interested in geography, I mean, this question would be sort of a really difficult one for them to thoughtfully engage with. So one of the intellectual tools we're bringing to this question is our own background knowledge, for example. So we're going to unpack those tools a little bit. I want you to look at these three types of questions and just think about what the differences are between the three types of questions. If you want to respond in the chat box to what you feel the differences are, please go ahead. What are type 1? How would you characterize type 1 questions? How would you characterize the type 2 questions? And how would you characterize the type 3 questions here? Okay, so Matt has said that type 1 is more specific answers, more knowledge understanding questions from Kristen. I'm sorry, I think it's Jennifer, if I heard correctly, and I apologize if it's not, but I believe personal opinion. More recall. Second one is more opinion. Third is the judgment. So we look at these different types of questions. Type 1 definitely, they're affectionately known as the Where's Waldo questions. Like the answer exists somewhere, you just have to find it. You need to look it up, and there is an answer. There is a correct answer. Type 2 questions are those personal preference questions, really. There's not a right or wrong here. It's about what you prefer, what you like, what you think. And it's interesting, I often speak about, when I was trying to engage students in more inquiry-based questioning, I sometimes would ask them a personal preference question, like, what do you think what do you think are the most significant factors contributing to climate change? And students would give me an answer, and sometimes, the answer wasn't particularly thoughtful, and I challenged them a bit. And they would get really angry with me, and fair enough, I understood that when you're inviting someone, to give their opinion or their preference, we're all pretty territorial about our opinions and preferences. And I realized I really had to look at the kinds of questions that I was asking, and it wasn't enough to ask a personal preference question and then a why. I had to really think about, okay, what am I inviting students into here? So yes, the type 3 involve a lot of thinking, Sarah, and students have to use the facts and the evidence to be more convincing. And the other thing that you notice in the type 3 is that there's some kind of criteria, right? So in the first question, that criteria of feasibility. In the second, what would be the best action? We've got to then understand what best means and unpack that. What are the 3 most significant impacts? Right? And it is the criteria that in a way creates a constraint. What I mean by that is the criteria is what creates that problematic situation in many respects, that now students have to make some thoughtful decisions. Matt, great example, great way to get students engaged is using pictures to generate questions. Absolutely, and I've got a few examples to show a little bit later. So those type 3 questions are more of the critical inquiry questions. I'm going to pass over this a little bit, but it's something to think about. You know, something you're teaching geography next week, can you bump up the thinking around that content through a specific type 3 question? Yeah, and again, there's different levels of inquiry. To Farah's question, you know, how we might be structuring our inquiries to respond to student questions. At times might we structure an inquiry and scaffold it that allows students to engage in critical inquiry. There's a number of different ways that we can engage with inquiry in our classroom. So again, looking at this little tweak that we can make and thinking about geographic content, the difference between comparing and contrasting versus looking at whether the individual similarities or differences are significant, right? What are the most significant differences between a wetland in this particular part of the world and another part of the world, right? Framing a question that way. Or order the 5 causes of water pollution, right? It's not a matter of just listing, but now they've got to rank them in terms of their importance. The difference between learning the properties or figuring out, you know, what are the characteristics of this climate zone based on this particular set of data, right? So having students really thinking through the content rather than just transmitting the content to them. And, you know, again, we're thinking about how in geography we want students to engage in geographic thinking. So how do we promote that? How do we promote a thinking classroom? We want to create a climate in our rooms that supports thinking in different ways through what we're doing, create opportunities, so how we're framing our tasks and challenges, building student capacity to think, so actually scaffolding their learning and providing guidance to them, so ongoing assessment that's going to inform their thinking. And the intellectual tools for quality thinking are really those 5 icons that are there at the bottom. So when you're engaging in creative, collaborative, and critical thinking, you need to bring to the table background knowledge, criteria for judgment. What is it upon which you're making your decisions? Thinking vocabulary. So we start to realize that our students don't know what evidence is, for example, or don't know what bias is. We actually have to explicitly teach and unpack that with them so that they can think more deeply. Thinking strategies. It could be a rating scale. It could be some kind of organizer by which they're making a decision. And the habits of mind. You know, persistence, attention to detail, really making those explicit and helping them become aware. So Charles Gritzner has the 3 questions that really inform the geographic discipline. What is where, why care, why there, and why care. And these are great big questions that you know, we see our students asking in different ways and helping them to come up with their own questions that are based on these prompts, right? That curiosity about, well, where is this happening? And why is it happening in this particular place? And why is it something that we should, you know, authentically care about? This, I think, is pretty helpful in terms of when we're having to grapple with this curriculum that's inviting critical inquiry. What are the things that we can do and make sure we're doing? And I highlighted, again, not because they're more important, but just some of the ones that I thought might be most useful for us to explore this evening. So how do we create those conditions? Framing tasks and questions in ways that problematize content that traditionally we've taught sometimes by rote and memorization. Teaching those tools that I was discussing, really explicitly teaching them. Moving out of assessment around the right answer and instead really focusing our assessment on well thought out, well justified explanations, the way in which students are using evidence. In other words, really turning our assessments to the quality of student thinking. Using the content of the discipline to inform thinking about everyday issues and actions. So again, building that authentic bridge to things that students will care about. And helping students use thinking strategies, not because it's something they do in your class, but because it becomes a tool that they independently use in order to think through a particular challenge. Absolutely. I mean, research skills are really important, and part of that quest for evidence. So how do we help students, not just, and I love that, breaking apart the word research and recognizing it as researching for something, looking up something that is already there, as opposed to engaging in a question where you are having to come up with a solution or an answer or more of a well thought out justification for your response to that critical inquiry. Very different from research. And engaging students, Farah, in dialogues that will help them foster critical thinking. Absolutely. So one of the things, just when I was writing one of the inquiry packs that the consortium has put out to help scaffold for teachers some critical inquiry into the new social studies and history geography curriculum, it's helpful to think about what a big question that you can see as a horizon question. It's something that you will think about, for many years. It's not an answerable question. It's something that really you can keep in your mind, as we do. There are these big questions that sometimes you can spend a lifetime trying to answer, as some different mathematicians or environmentalists or scientists or artists grapple with. And how do we look at that curriculum and help frame some of those questions? And of course, as many of you mentioned, trying to get students to come up with their own question about that. But then thinking about, too, what is going to be the challenge that we'll present, the project that will be that demonstration of learning for the class. And what are we going to accept as a demonstration of learning to really see and be able to assess the quality of student thinking? So, again, we have to ask at the end of this unit, what is it that students need to know? What do we really, when they leave this geography class, what are some, the core things? And it could be 3 things. It doesn't have to be 7 things as I have here. It could be 3 key ideas that you think are really fundamental. And also those core competencies. What is it we really want them to be able to do? And focusing our instruction on those things, right? Instead of sometimes that rush to cover content takes us out of what's truly important here. I'd like you again to just take a moment and think of that question again based on what we've been talking about. If you have some more thoughts around how to effectively engage grade 7 students in opportunities to think like a geographer. And I'll just give you a moment to do that. And again, if some people want to share what they're writing in their thought book in the chat box, please feel free. And again, please continue if you want to keep answering that question. I'm going to move us along. I'm just going to read Rachel and Julia's comment. What helps in engagement in my classroom is talking about real issues. Yes, case studies. Absolutely, poverty is what we're talking about now. Yeah, and absolutely, and and that really comes up. It's certainly an issue that comes up in physical geography, but also in the human geography. And I do find that the physical geography can be a challenge for teachers in that way, and also to engage students in the physical geography. The thought book that we're working on, that I've introduced, can be a really powerful tool, not to market, but when we invite students into these big questions and into a critical challenge, we can use it for our own assessment as learning. So the students are continually reflecting and applying their learning and understandings to help refine their thinking. They're powerful to assess for learning, so you can have conversations with students about what they're grappling with, and of course for that triangulation of assessment evidence. So observation, conversation. So again, thought books are a really powerful thing we can introduce in geography to promote that kind of integrative thinking. One of the ideas that was mentioned was about the interconnectedness that we really want students to get from geography. And yet sometimes we can end up feeling that we have to teach in a way that isolates and separates. So how do we create that opportunity? The thought book can be one space when they're responding to a particular challenge where there's ongoing learning. I do want to also address another challenge that I felt as a geography teacher, and that is that really I would love to be able to engage in physical geography outside. And the truth is that, I take as many opportunities as I can, but the reality is it's often more of something we do a few times, at one of our great outdoor education centers, or a trip that's organized. Some people, in this webinar tonight may be able to engage with that much more. I know for myself, teaching in an urban school, this is one of the challenges, is how do I get students to engage with physical geography when they can feel so disconnected from it? So I've really identified that as a challenge. Absolutely can be a digital thought book, Farah, absolutely. So that's a question I have. How do we meaningfully engage students in geographic thinking when opportunities to interact with the physical environment can sometimes be limited? And to me, this comes back to what's in the new curriculum around citizenship and how we might help students. This was brought up by one of the teachers, that they get very engaged when they're learning about environmental issues. They want to take action. And it is incredible because grades 7 and 8, I think as most of us know, are powerful years where students are really, they've got this sense of justice that's coming up. And, sometimes it's coming out in different ways around, this is not fair, that's not fair, in their personal lives, and then being able to harness that and getting them to take that lens on the world is very exciting, and how we're really helping them to come into themselves as citizens at this time. And so one thing that I found to really engage students is to mirror for them examples of people their own age who are taking on various challenges in our world. So I've got some teens here. Alex Lortz, he developed this campaign. It's an app on your iPhone, I Matter, that really is inspiring youth. And it's from the United States, but it's become a global movement. I think it's still quite concentrated in the U.S. And his group has actually challenged the U.S. government for their inaction on climate change, saying that it is risking the future of his generation and those that are coming. So really powerful teen environmentalists. Charmaine Moyo in Zimbabwe, who has developed basically a recycling program and is incredibly powerful where there was no recycling program. Takea Blaney here from Canada, I believe Squamish, who is an ambassador now for the United Nations and a very, very fierce advocate of protection of water in particular. And Boyan Slat, who as a teenager, a Dutch inventor who has developed and is prototyping, and he's gotten a number of investors, he's developed some technology to rid the oceans of their plastic. So, you know, when I've presented students with various examples of other global citizens who are tackling the environment, it's very inspirational, and it's something that resonates with them and becomes very authentic for them, because especially when you get some videos of some of these youth speaking in their own words. Another way that we can engage students is to actually launch our unit with an exciting task, where we're inviting them right from the beginning, from the very first class, to speculate, hypothesize, try to solve the challenge, that we want them to grapple with. So that instead of a culminating being something that students do at the end, what happens if we move it forward and we allow students to be working with that all the way along? Because what can happen is then we've got that time for integration and time for the thinking to be more meaningful and to be deeper. So sometimes one of the mismemes that I think we all with good intentions fall into is we feel like I can't give students that big challenge yet. I've got to teach them the stuff first and then give them the big question to think about. But if we give them the big question and then are scaffolding that learning, that background knowledge, the things that the competencies that they need as they go along, we can really engage them in different ways. And one of the great examples of this is we see how many of our students are quite engaged with video games. I mean, when you play a video game, you don't read the instruction booklet. You just launch in and you learn, and it speeds up when you're getting it. It slows down when you're having difficulty, and that's part of what we get hooked on, and we're learning as we go. So how can we design our classrooms to be more brain compatible that way and really hook students into the learning? So this is an example. This is another team environmentalist from the U.S., from Colorado, and he gave a talk. It was part spoken word because he's a rap artist as well, and he gave a very powerful talk at Bioneers. And one of the things he says is, "What better time to be born than now?" So what about if this was the very first lesson? And so in the geography resource that I wrote, this is what we have as the first lesson. What about if we, give them something? We have some youth activists who are speaking about the environment, and we're asking students right away to speculate, like, what do you think? Is this the best time to be born? Like, how do you square that with some of the things that we know our students are thinking about? And again, noticing that we get them right away talking to each other, creating that community of thinkers right away. And if the task was that by the end of the unit, what we wanted students to do was draft a message to the world that shares, 4 powerful ideas and 4 of the most inspiring responses to the most significant challenges and opportunities we're facing. What if that's what we want them doing at the end, and we bring that right up front and present them with the challenge and have them in their thought books grappling with that right away? What would your message be like today? What would it be? And then as they learn more and more of the geographic content, and as they build the competency of thinking like a geographer, they can build that message, refine that message, change it, right? That's what we do, and sometimes we don't have the time to do because there's always the pressure of, I've got to get the right answer in this very high stakes moment, like a test or exam. But if we want that integrative thinking, we can present them with a really powerful task that we want them to do and have them coming back to it as we're continuing to move through some exciting content. And it becomes more exciting for them because they've got something they're doing all the way through that they're hooking into. So instead of that summative task being the proof of learning, what about if it became the driver for the learning? And we become more of the choreographers of that experience and helping them, scaffolding them with what they need, in this case with the geographic content, in order to be successful in that task. And you could have them organize their content, their thought book around, as they're learning about different challenges and opportunities, they have a space to record those and think through those, make decisions about them, select them. They've got a space for some of the powerful ideas. They've got a space to look at some of the inspiring, sustainable examples of the way we're responding. And also, if they're doing a message, you want them thinking about, okay, who's your audience and what's the format? And starting to, really break down our task and letting students think about it all the way through. So, about topics of the movement of Syrians to Canada, again, a very, very important issue. I'm speaking really in this webinar about the physical geography unit. So, and I do think that is important. It certainly comes up in grade 8. I've had my grades do some really important thinking around refugees. And I do think that it is more aligned with that grade 8 curriculum, but a very important issue. And certainly in current events, and something we should be talking about with our students. Another big task, here's another example, is how would you map changing patterns? This could be the task, that you've got students drafting an effective map of the world that outlines 4 of the most significant changes to an environmental pattern created by human impact. So that overarching inquiry question, how do we effectively respond to our changing Earth? We're right in it. How are we going to effectively respond? So we want to make sure that our effective inquiry question, if we're designing it, if we're co-constructing it with students, or if they're designing it, I still think if students are designing it, we would like it to fit certain criteria so that it ensures that we are helping them gain the competencies and some of the key concepts that are important for geographic thinking. So it should invite students to explore an idea or issue. And it has broad generative or predictive powers. It's not a Googleable answer. It's something we're going to have to really grapple with and dig into. It allows us to, by answering it, we're going to have to grapple with important concepts and issues in the subject area. And it will nurture those competencies, in this case, of thinking like a geographer, and things like being able to read a map, being able to use different technologies relating GIS or the ARC story, which is really powerful. I mean, that would come in with that culminating activity. That's right, the Esri. Absolutely. So these core competencies, that question and that challenge we're inviting students into will actually provide this meaningful opportunity for them to engage with that. And that we can nurture active citizenship as well through the kind of challenge that we're presenting. And I can see that so many of the teachers in this webinar are really committed to global citizenship, and that is fantastic, right? I mean, that's really such an important opportunity that we have in geography. And that the critical challenge, in order for it to be engaging, and again, this is what teachers have been talking about here in this webinar, to be authentic, it needs to stimulate or simulate life outside of school and have an audience beyond the teachers in the classroom. So putting some of their key messages to the world up on a YouTube site, that obviously you have to look at different permissions issues around that, but certainly you can find a way, or that you send those videos to a particular agency, perhaps the Ministry of the Environment. You make those available. Or if you're doing the Map as Art project, you create a gallery and you invite the community in. This really makes such a huge difference when there is that authentic audience. Students take their work so much more seriously because it's also this opportunity for the community to come to students and say, yes, you matter. Your voice matters. So again, just looking at that, an overarching question, how can we accurately and creatively map environmental change caused by human impact to stimulate action on the environment? And that big challenge that we launched the unit with is create a compelling map. And you can have them from that first class, like what would you map, today if you were doing this? And as they're going along, you're continuing to revisit that challenge and they're working on it. So at the end, it's not this big project that's going to take hours to do, but it's more of a pulling together of their key thinking, and they've been grappling with it. And so you're going to get a higher quality of work as well. So that's an example of some creative maps that I did with my students, and we had a gallery and invited people to come in and see their maps, and they were really excited by it. Another challenge was this idea, and this became the overarching inquiry for the 7A inquiry pack that we wrote that's now available. How should we respond to our changing Earth? And the compelling multimedia message to the world is the critical challenge. So again, I just invite you to take a moment now and integrate some of the different ideas, what you're thinking. How do you effectively engage grade 7 students in opportunities to think like a geographer? Absolutely. There's so many fantastic opportunities to incorporate and integrate geography and mathematics. It improves their spatial reasoning. Also with data management, their ability to read graphs effectively, use graphs as evidence, and understanding evidence and being able to graph evidence and map evidence is really powerful. So what are some of the tools that are going to support our students as we're teaching about these geographic concepts and issues? Again, just coming back to the intellectual tools of background knowledge, criteria for judgment, the critical thinking, vocabulary, thinking strategies, habits of mind. If these become also lenses for us in the classroom, we can ensure that the tasks we're designing and assessing are really focused on helping students develop quality thinking. So, for example, it's important to distinguish between evidence and a conclusion. So here's a potential task that we could invite students into that's building on their critical thinking vocabulary in this case. And sometimes we forget how important, again, because of the rush for content, it's really these thinking words and vocabulary that support our students, right? Support their learning, support their thinking. So getting them to differentiate between these ideas, right? And again, then we've gotten them to think about it. Initially, give their own ideas about what's evidence, what's a conclusion, provide them with definitions, and then they can look at their definitions and decide how well did these definitions match your previous ideas. So we're intellectually engaging them in the task of differentiating between evidence and conclusion, rather than just giving them the definition. We're inviting that thinking. And again, just helpful that, if they're drafting a message that needs to show strong geographic evidence, well, how do we gather evidence? We gather evidence through research, through observation, through experiments. These are some of the key ways we gather evidence. And how do we convey evidence? And realizing I can do it through video, through maps, through graphs, through diagrams, through words. And so as they start to encounter these things in the unit of study, and they're having to select evidence, they become comfortable in identifying what counts as geographic evidence and the different formats that it can take and the different ways in which it is gathered. A task could be to help students highlight the most useful pieces of geographic evidence from a text, or from a map, or from a diagram, or from a video. And the consortium has a great, if your school board is partnered with the consortium, you actually do have access using your your school board email, and we have this wonderful collection, Tools for Thought, and there's fantastic lessons on differentiating between evidence and conclusions and how to effectively infer. There's many of just hundreds of tools for thought really on that site. And again, here's another invitation to help students think critically. Yes, absolutely. Thoughtful statement. By using different sources, students also learn how to corroborate their evidence. Yes. Yes, so important. And helping them being able to determine what is strong evidence. Make those distinctions, that kind of nuance in their thinking. Or viewing a video, in this case, Apo Island in the Philippines, which regenerated their whole fishery, their fishing industry, and they sustained themselves through the fish, had collapsed, and they resuscitated it. And so there's a great video that's available. And again, showing that video and asking students to identify the examples of geographic evidence so they become proficient in being able to do this. We're really building that competency in them. Right? And then you can have them return. And so this was one of the points I wanted to make, to that central challenge that you've given them. And now they can go back to their initial message. And so that very first class or first few classes, you had them initially speculate, what would you say? And then you've introduced these ideas of geographic evidence that you'll use throughout the unit, and they can come back and revisit their message and strengthen it right from those initial classes. And then you're continuing to do that throughout the unit. I just want to make sure I get this comment here. Matt's used sticky notes as a way of breaking down text and then going back and determining how this information supports understanding. Yeah, it's a great strategy of scaffolding that thinking. Right? Sticky notes, that's a great thinking strategy. And then if they have that in their pocket, that when they encounter a text that might be dense, they'll be able to use that strategy that you taught them, hopefully independently. And again, you know, asking students, you know, what they've learned, giving them a little signal, 1, 2, 3, 4, about whether they understand or they can't think of examples. They kind of have an understanding. They can think of some examples, or they can think of many examples and easily explain what they've learned. So they start to become metacognitively aware as well of the level of their own understanding. So this is another way to create a thinking classroom in geography. Right? So what are the learning goals, and inviting them to reflect on their learning goals at the end of the lesson. So when you look at that curriculum, the new curriculum, and try to think of how would you, how might we divide it? How might we, sort of break this down in meaningful ways and have some different inquiries? And one of the ways I just wanted to put forward is you could see it as, you could have an inquiry into the natural changing patterns to understand, how climate naturally is different in various regions of the world, how vegetation can be organized according to forests, deserts and grasslands and tundra, different water systems, what are the differences between ocean systems and river systems and lakes, and how have we as human beings traditionally responded to these natural patterns, these natural changes in our world. And again, so someone was mentioning a strategy of looking at pictures and being able to infer. So rather than telling students, okay, here are the 4 aspects of the environment, because the new geography curriculum really focuses on those 4 aspects, you could ask them to look at this picture and slowly pull out and deduce what the 4 aspects are, looking at details of the environment. What do you notice? What do you see? And again, looking at these natural changing patterns of earthquakes, you know, would this be a good place to live? What are some challenges and opportunities that are related to living in a place threatened by a volcano? So this is our world. These are some of the natural patterns, natural changes, and we as human beings are responding, have had to respond. So we've found out some tough lessons when we've set up, you know, when we've settled near volcanoes, and so we've learned from that, and we've, you know, done different things. Or people still settle near volcanoes, but here's what they have in place. Or what happens, you know, when people live on fault lines. Or again, using the thinking, the engagement to look at this location, not telling them where it is, and say, well, when would be the best time to visit? So building the skill of analyzing climate graphs this way, which is, again, one of the key expectations in that grade 7 unit. So when would you visit? You know, look at this. What do you think would be a good time? And, you know, students will, you know, give some evidence to support their thinking on this. Yeah, Debbie, that's a great idea, using annotating current events articles to take a look at geographic perspectives. Right, and annotating maps as well is fantastic. Or what about if you had some briefing sheets that had information about these different locations or data about the climate, and students had to confirm, okay, where is this location now? And they build their understanding of different climate zones through that process as opposed to the transmissive way. Right, so giving them some climate graphs and having them grapple, okay, well, where might this be? And then confirm that location. So having them thinking through. And when we talk about climate, you know, initially building that understanding of what is the natural greenhouse effect. So, you know, how does our climate system work? And then another line, so when we've sort of helped students understand these natural changes and the ways in which we've responded, we can then transition into, okay, now there's a number of changes to patterns in the physical environment, but these are human induced. And we start to look at those dramatic changes that we're now living through. And that can be a useful way to sort of look at that curriculum, right? And helping them start to grapple with these environmental changes. Building on those 4 aspects of the environment, how has it changed? Which one has changed the most in this image? And then, you know, bringing patterns and trends and the reading of maps, developing those thinking strategies to help them read, you know, more sophisticated maps than perhaps they were reading in grade 6. That's one of the things that begins to happen in grade 7, and looking for those helpful clues and teaching them to look for helpful clues. And they're also now really entering into the content of, okay, now there's some dramatic changes that are happening in our world. We're noticing that this map is mostly, you know, colored red, that we're dealing with record warming temperatures or much warmer than average temperatures. How are we going to respond? And this was someone talking about annotating articles. You can also annotate maps. This map you could say, okay, well, in this particular region, so in the Arctic, what are some of the issues that are going to come up and how are we going to need to respond to these dramatic changes? So having students think through, or having them rank order the factors that contribute to climate change instead of just listing. Yeah, annotating pictures, definitely. And what about if we gave them some of the factors that are contributing to changing climate and getting them to think through, well, which of these might play the greatest role in the changes that we're currently experiencing? The evidence that you're seeing, like that map, is now evidence of the changing pattern in climate. And then again, the way we can use images to have students thinking through, you know, what are the human activities that are causing the changes in weather events and climate patterns? So really simple tweaks in our lessons and the questions we ask that get students engaged. Just take a moment now. Yeah, absolutely. Guest speakers certainly can enhance the class. And Skype has really opened that up for us as well. So, you know, if you have different connections, and even it's amazing sometimes how generous people can be. You know, you can ask someone who works in an environmental agency or some of these youth activists or different geographers and cartographers, and it's amazing how generous people can be, and you can organize a Skype chat and have them ask the students, as the students ask really powerful questions of the speakers. So again, like helping students think through the evidence, selecting the most significant impacts. Yeah, Google Hangout, thank you, fantastic resource. But the other issue too that's a challenge is how do we engage students in these hopeful geographic discussions while we're accurately analyzing its realities? And the realities are at times pretty bleak in certain respects. You know, there is a lot of damage to our environment, and we, you know, I've noticed in my students and some of the comments through the, you know, over the years, and there is a worry that I notice has increased in students when they're talking. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that or wants to speak to that. If people have noticed students sort of feeling more anxious about the physical environment in different ways, or if their comments have shifted in your time. And again, please feel free to note that in the chat box, or if you want to use the poll to say, yes, I've really noticed that, or I haven't. Yeah. Yeah, Rachel and Julia said students are thinking about things you never thought about. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, I notice it too, and in my early years of teaching, I was focused at times on teaching about, okay, this is what's happening, and really presenting them with accurate information, which I still want to do. But what I also realized is we couldn't just talk about how challenging things were. We also really had to build within the class a kind of bridge into what is possible. Yeah, Al Gore, the film Inconvenient Truth was very scary, and I view that as my class, and I don't view that film anymore. Not because I don't think it's an important resource, but because I noticed it had a real emotional impact, and I felt there might be other ways for me to bring these issues into my class. So I do think that's something that we're all aware of and that we're all having to deal with, is these are very difficult, these changes, these dramatic changes that we are currently experiencing, and how this generation is having to grapple with that. So one of the ways is to start looking at the sustainable responses, and what are the most sustainable responses to these issues, and what's the criteria for sustainability, and really understanding that. And also, what are some of the most inspiring and sustainable responses, or what are the responses that you find motivating, and inviting students into those kinds of conversations, right? So now, we want to look at, well, how are we responding? And we've got some, as we know in our world, we've got some responses that are very inspiring and sustainable. We have some responses that probably are questionable, and getting students to think about those. Like, for example, is copying the effect of volcanic ash, which some are proposing to develop a cooling effect on Earth by blocking sunlight, is this worthwhile, right? Is this a sustainable response? What are the most inspiring sustainable responses that are out there, or what are the most inspiring and sustainable responses that I can think of? Also bringing in the innovation and the design thinking into the classroom. So again, I wanted to connect, and I'm also bringing the Martinez are brothers, and they're really powerful. Like, I've got some video links that I've included here, some different rap that they've done together, speaking about that. But this is, I want to show, this is a design one of my students did. She was researching flooding in more impoverished areas. And she really went into this critical inquiry. She developed her own question around it. And she designed she calls it the temp tent, a temporary tent. And there was a lot of thinking behind this. You can see that she did refashion an existing Tupperware container, but when she explained to you, what she had done, and, what was included there, and you can see a little bit of a zipper, we can also invite our students into those innovations, to look at responses that exist, but also, why not be Imagineers and imagine some of the solutions that they would come up with, right? That they really can harness that. Like, when you show them Boyan Slat, who developed the ocean cleanup, they're just like, yeah, like, why not me? Why can't I also put my mind to some of these problems? And it's really inspiring for them. Oh, sorry, Debbie, the student project is not on your screen. Is anyone else having that difficulty? Oh,
sorry, this could be my fault. I was just trying to add something to a slide near the end, and I probably have done the wrong thing. So,
okay, now can everyone see the activist? Can you see the activist slide? And now I've just moved it. Right. I think I just clicked. Okay, great.
Sorry, I apologize for that. I'm learning.
No problem. It's okay. We're all learners. So yeah, so this student had, this is what she designed. She used some Tupperware. You can see the little zipper she's put in there, and she had a whole booklet, and she had maps, about her area, and it was incredible. It was so inspiring. Again, so we can invite students to be innovative and contribute their thinking and good thinking to some of these challenges that we're facing. And I find that is also a way that really helps them work through some of the difficult emotions that come with that, with studying about these really challenging things. So just to kind of, just bring some of our own thinking and learning back, just wanted to give you some of these points to consider around the practices that support sustained inquiry, which this new curriculum really does invite us to do, so that we're always investigating, that we, even those little lesson challenges that I was giving some examples of with some of the pictures and the maps, that we embed these mini challenges in daily inquiries, that we've got something that's iterative, that students are constantly returning to and being able to think through and revise their thinking and change their thinking about. So if they're doing that message, they're able to refine and revise as they go through, that they're able to reflect, and that we're giving them feedback really on the quality of their thinking as we go along. And I love this this thought book. This is J.K. Rowling's one of her kind of storyboards, text storyboards for Harry Potter. And I show this to students, and they really enjoy seeing that. And a lot of them really love J.K. Rowling, of course. And you know, thinking is messy, you know, and if we're designing something or developing something or planning something, then it is going to be messy. We're going to cross things out, and we're going to come back to things, and we're going to change our minds when we have stronger evidence, or, you know, and creating that for our students. It's really working on these complex problems and tasks that the brain connections develop, and what we practice is what we become good at. So when our students really understand, so in this case when they really understand geography, they can explain it to someone, they can create it differently. You know, as my student did with her temp tent, they can transfer it, they can assess it, they can question it. These are some of the things we want to see our students be able to do with the geographic content. And we're assessing their thinking, we're helping them, we're assessing them on, can they draw on the accurate and relevant information? Can they make those reasoned judgments? Can they use key concepts related to thinking? Are they using strategies? A number of you have named a number of great strategies used with their students. Do you see them working and bringing those out effectively? And do students exhibit effective thinking dispositions? Okay, so how can we effectively communicate the use of the triangle of assessment to parents and students? Yeah, that is a really important issue. And certainly when I started assessing students, I had some students sort of rebel because I actually I assess very, very frequently, but I don't evaluate as frequently as I did. So there's less marks, but I'm building the culture where students are assessing themselves, and I've really communicated that with parents, but certainly I had students at first say, I need the mark to motivate me, and you know, we had to really have some conversations about that. But there's a lot of different checklists that I use with students, getting them to assess. We have conversations, and also communicating with parents about, you know, what I'm seeing. Definitely videoing, taking photographs, the pedagogical documentation, so that you have the evidence as well of the student thinking. So we move away from it just being, I mean, I've got a lot of things in my, you know, my assessment binder, but a lot of it can be check marks. I do have marks, but it's less than I did. I have a lot of check marks, and I also, when I'm giving feedback, is I use P, I, and N now, and the students understand that system is, P means proficient, like you've got this concept or, you know, this competency, you've really demonstrated it, or P plus, sometimes say, yeah, you've really got this. I is in progress, like you're getting there, and N is not yet, right? So you're not quite there in terms of exhibiting the thinking or the competency. So that's one of the tools that I use in terms of the formative, the constant assessment to move students forward. And again, these are the, you know, these are the overall expectations for that grade 7 physical geography unit. And these are on the right-hand side is what I want to see. This is the evidence of what I want to see. I want to see that they can thoughtfully analyze some of the challenges and opportunities that have been presented by the physical environment and how people have responded. I want to see them make meaningful connections between responses and challenges. I want to see them be critically minded and have a curious stance when they're learning about the planet. I want to see them effectively collect and organize and analyze data, recognize features and implications, justify their conclusions, effectively communicate their ideas and information, and demonstrate a thoughtful understanding of natural and human-induced changes and make meaningful connections between the 4 aspects of the environment and the ways they interact. So, really clarifying what am I looking for and what do I want to see and what's the evidence, and thinking about the evidence I'm going to be collecting as I'm looking for this. Can I post this? Yes, I can't post the entire presentation, but I will select a few key slides if people want to let me know some of the key slides you're interested in, but I can certainly give you this slide. And again, just coming back, where we started of how will you effectively engage grade 7 students in opportunities to think like a geographer. I hope that you've gotten some ideas from this webinar. It's been great to be with you. Yes, all the slides are part of the recording, but if someone does want a slide, I can send that. People can have my email, and I'll let you see that in a moment. I also wanted to show you that at the Critical Thinking Consortium, what might be helpful is the synopsis of the unit that we worked on for the last year. The synopsis is available, and the launch and the first lesson are there for free. The Critical Thinking Consortium is a not-for-profit, so the entire unit, there is a charge for it, just because of the cost of producing it. But the synopsis can be helpful as well in terms of helping you think through and organize this unit. You may find it beneficial. Looking at the launch and the first lesson might also give you some ideas about how it's structured. So I encourage you to check out the resources. This is my contact information. Please feel free to be in touch with me, whether on Twitter or through my email account. Oh, I'm glad you've used the synopsis, Debbie. That's great. There really are great briefing sheets and images there on the PowerPoint slides, that because sometimes it's finding the resources that takes so much time. So part of this was an attempt to help scaffold some inquiry for teachers, because we know, and I know from personal experience, that that's often one of the most challenging parts of doing it, as much as we really want to do it. I just want to leave you with this thought, because our students really are the future citizens, and the truth is that we're going to really need them to be considering these issues and grappling with them, and how we invite them to do that, to fall in love with the planet, give them those opportunities to understand it as the geographer does and have that lens, and also engage with the realities that we're currently facing and the possibilities. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know you're probably very busy, and I really appreciate the time that you've taken, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was an outstanding session. I think your geography class would be a wonderful place to be. Your manner and how you respect and honor the environment and the student. I would expect the students who are studying about the environment. It's very inspiring. So thank you very much. You challenged us tonight to really think, and here we are at 9 o'clock after a full day of work. And I imagine that you do the very same for your students. Thank you to all of the participants. You certainly were challenged to think tonight and to participate, and your thoughts and contributions really made this an excellent session. So thank you very much. You'll notice on this screen that there is a link. The goo.gl link is a link to the evaluation for tonight's presentation, and OTF really does appreciate, they don't take very long to do, and OTF really does appreciate if you would do those, because they help to form the plans for following months and for next year. We're already looking ahead to next year. I'm going to put in the chat that link to the feedback survey, as well as to the OTF Connect calendar. So coming up, sorry, I've got the other two sessions from this week, which I shouldn't have, but coming up next week, there are 4 sessions. We're running Monday to Thursday now, and it's a full calendar between now and May, and there's lots of new sessions being offered. So next week, you can see what's on, and then if you want to take a look, there's a link in the chat for the calendar, the full calendar. And there are still some blank spots on there, but by the time it's really complete, you'll see that the calendar will be full Monday to Thursday every week between now and May. And there was a question about accessing this webinar. You will be receiving an email from OTF probably this evening. If not this evening, then tomorrow. And it will have in it a link to this recording. I will be stopping the recording shortly, and you'll receive that link. So you can look for that. But it will also be archived along with everything else in OTF's past webinars and resources. And I put a link on there in the chat to that as well. I'm just going to skip that slide. So that's it for tonight. Thank you all once again for participating from right across the province. It's been a wonderful evening. I've learned so much, and I'm sure you all have as well. To leave the session, the best way to do it is to actually quit the application. You can just quit the window as well. Usually that works, but it might be best to just fully quit the application. So I'll say good night, and thank you again to Maria for a wonderful session.
Thank you so much, Susan, for moderating.
It was definitely a pleasure. So just as everyone's leaving, Maria, we can just chat a little bit. That went really smoothly. Your timing was perfect. How did you feel?
I think it helped. Yeah, I think I was surprised. I actually got through it all. but I think having a smaller group also helped. With
yeah,
that,
I think
although
so.
I was surprised because I think there were about 84 signed up. So I imagine maybe we've got a number of schools have a PA day tomorrow. It's report card writing time.
Yeah.
It could have just been a really busy time for teachers, as I understand.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, we had a session last year, and I think we had 80 signed up, and we had about 20 that came. So you just never know. They never get more than 50%. So anything up to there is, and they don't seem to mind. Whoever is here is the right audience. So
absolutely.
And you're right. I think because you did offer a number of opportunities for involvement, it was quite nice, really, that it was a manageable number because, and they did occasionally have things to say in the chat, and it was nice. It was good. I really enjoyed it. I loved it. You're a great presenter. Have you done? I can't remember if I asked you. Have you done this particular presentation somewhere else?
No, I developed this just for tonight. This is my first time doing.
Yeah. Will you have an opportunity to use it again?
I hope so. I would love to do that. Perhaps with this switch to the new curriculum, and as it takes more hold, there'll be more opportunities just to share. And I think that's what I was trying to say is because I took the year away from teaching to develop the resource. Mm-hmm. I just had the time to really think about it. Yeah. That we often don't have. Yeah. And really, as a teacher, it's to share that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Please, take this and use it. That's really the hope.
I apologize for that little mess up. I didn't receive the link for your. Sorry, I didn't stop the recording, did I?